Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast, where we talk with the people behind the current events and breakthroughs in brain implants in an understandable way, helping bring together various fields involved in neuroprosthetics. Here is your host, Ladan.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast. Today, we are talking to Amir Bozorgzadeh. And I think I deserve a subscription just for being able to nail that pronunciation. Anyways, the founders of Virtuleap, which is brain training in VR, virtual reality. And, so this is a little bit different than our usual, neural implants, brain-computer interfaces. But I think there are a lot of connections. And I especially think that neural implants can be improved with virtual reality, and especially that interface that they have. They are based in Lisbon, and they're kind of making games to improve, cognition. So kind of like Luminosity, if you guys know what that is. Anyways, kind of a shorter episode, but hopefully you enjoy it. Okay. Bozorgzadeh. Did I say that right?
Yeah, but you put in like a weird accent there, which is funny. But actually, you didn't say it that bad, so I'm not gonna foul you at all. I'm actually quite impressed.
And that's an Iranian name, right?
And you get a second point. Like honestly, you're starting well. It's an Iranian name. My family relocated or immigrated to Vancouver, Canada, where I was raised. And after university, a couple years into my career, I relocated to Dubai. And then after 8 years later, which wasn't that long of time because in Dubai, you don't have seasons, you just have summer and hell. It went really fast. And I came to Amsterdam at first, and I started writing for VR and AR on the space in general. And then about a year and a half later, I got into the VR sector and here we are now.
Wow. Yeah. And so you're the founder of Virtuleap, which is kind of a AR, virtual reality, cognitive brain training. What's that?
Yeah, I was just saying shame on you for calling it AR. We will be AR at a certain point, but right now we are all about isolating you in reality. Yeah, but sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty cool. And I mean, some people might be like, what? VR, game training, cognitive, enhancement, game training. Why is it on the Neural Implant Podcast? But I think there's a connection here. And I think it's, we had talked about this actually before the call, that you kind of want to get into this BCI space. And I think this would be really good for kind of an interface between implanted devices and whatever they can do with it. Because honestly, some of the interface tech is a little bit outdated. What do you think about all this?
Okay, so my co-founder and I, Hossein Jalali, he's the CTO. I'm the only non-technical person on the team, doing calls like this. And so when I talk about our vision, I'll talk about it in much more layman terms in some ways and less practical than how he would say it, of course. But, the intersection of brain training with VR is very critical, first and foremost, because there's a ceiling when it comes to what you can do with a screen-based devices with your smartphone and fiddling with the fingers and then using a screen-based app like a tablet. Even Elon Musk, he talks about, with these screen-based devices, it's kind of like a BCI in a way. It's part of an extension of you in some weird way. It's just not that integral yet and that intimate. But when you get into VR, you're already starting to trigger the autonomic nervous system into believing the experience is real, right? So you're engaging multiple cognitive learning systems in parallel and in synchrony. The vestibular balance system is engaged. Your proprioception feels right. And if you actually play around with proprioception, like giving yourself really long alien arms, your brain will have a problem with that. So when you create VR experiences, you're engaging the body in a way that has never been possible before. And if you think about what another extra additional extension or evolution of that would be, it's naturally to bring in BCI. And there's interesting companies doing amazing work along these lines like Neurable and so on. And we're certainly have it planned to even make a certain category of games that are BCI even oriented inherently. But we are on a long road where that wouldn't necessarily come into play until maybe, let's say 18 months from now. Right now, our mission is to just build a library of standardized VR games that are basically closed loop kind of games that are like 3 minutes each. You would play, you would plateau at a certain difficulty level, and then you'd leave, get back into the real world, come back at a later time to see how you progress. And it's more or less like the gym for the mind at this stage. But we do have big plans, and BCI is certainly one of the main factors.
Yeah, definitely. I checked out some of the games and they look fun. They're kind of like brain training games. Reminds me a little bit of the game Portal. And there was like a balancing game and he almost has to like balance some balls on a tray. Couldn't you just do that in real life?
You could. I think the point of a lot of these games is, and you're going to find this, when we create this library of games, they're all designed initially by a cognitive scientist or a neuroscientist or a neuropsychologist, and they're based on some standardized, well-known, and very much used actively by cognitive scientists in the real world, right? For rehabilitation, they use things like the Stroop test, and then we take that test and we use it as inspiration, or we directly translate it into a VR game. But the point is to create a large library of these games that are, offered to a user in a programmatic way with reporting, all this juicy stuff to make it meaningful. But it's the idea that you would come in every day and play some games. And of course, a lot of those games would be very simple, like Memory Wall, if you played it, or another game will be completely not available in the real world, of course, but there will be a mix of these, and that'll be the natural thing is as we build this library from the current 7 games to 20 games by the end of the year, and then probably 100 by year 3 or so. Some of them will be quite natural and obvious. Some of them will be very basic, whereas other ones will be very complex. And we'll learn a lot and we'll improve a lot of these games and figure out which ones work the best as we do initial studies with our research partners like the Pacific Brain Health Center and White Plains Hospital and the National Innovation Center for Aging at Newcastle University. But my point is that VR superpower isn't necessarily sometimes what people think it is, which is like going into the oasis and like tripping out psychedelically through a digital format or something mind-blowing. Sometimes it's about being able to offer something in 3 dimensions at a scalable fashion at the highest quality to anybody, and that's our real purpose, is offering the full enchilada of really amazing cognitive testing and training games at your doorstep available for you and always maintaining that quality.
Yeah, definitely. And you kind of standardize it. And also now we're recording this in the middle of the COVID quarantine. So we're all locked down. And so we're all speculating like, what's this going to change in our lives? And so this would be a good way for rehabilitators or therapists to kind of standardize and be able to help out people that need to do this kind of stuff. So who's the target market for this actually?
No, when Lumosity is one of those screen-based brain training apps on your smartphone that's just so popular, right? 85 million members, probably not active members, but they say 85 million members. And a few years ago, they got fined by the FDA because they exaggerated their claims, right? On what they can actually say it does, but they're still grossly popular. And when they launched initially, they thought, it's the aging population. That's the target segment that stands to benefit the most. And that is certainly our focus as well. We are very, very much oriented on the fact that in 10 years' time in the US, by 2030, the elderly will outnumber children for the first time in history there. It already has occurred in countries like Portugal, where we're primarily based, and other countries in Europe, a lot of countries in Asia. But by 2030, all of the baby boomers are going to be over 65. And as the wealthiest segment of the population, we can expect a big demand for any technologies that extends their quality of life. And so that's our focus. We believe that's the audience, anyone over 40s in general, but like the elderly population is what we're focused on. And that's particularly in relation to, can we address cognitive illnesses like dementia and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's? Can we address even cognitive illnesses like schizophrenia? And perhaps even can we address learning challenges like ADHD and such? But these are the types of niche groups we're initially focused on. We've created this web application that allows organizations to basically manage and monitor the cognitive performance of their users. And we're working on a machine learning algorithm that can serve as a digital health marker for the early detection of cognitive illnesses by mining the big data of VR gameplay over time. So we got a lot of these things that are very sciencey and researchy, and we're trying to tackle initially, even at the outset, how to help people extend their quality of life and be in higher cognitive health. But invariably, in 2 years' time, will also be known as just that app that anyone uses to get to their flow state easier or be more mentally fit, so to speak.
Yeah, very cool. And then you guys are based in Lisbon, Portugal. Is there any reason for that?
Being a VR startup has not been a fun thing sometimes, especially at this time in 2012, 13, 14, there was this big craze by investors to invest in VR, and they thought it was going to be this big, huge thing really, really way too fast. And when it didn't happen in 2 years, they all said, oh, whoops, we were wrong. And then they crashed the whole market, and investment was very hard to come by. And that's exactly when we started. So burn rate, or the salaries of the people who work on your team, is a really big thing. Salaries are much less here in Portugal, but obviously the cost of living is less proportionally. But for a startup raising money, I can hire 3 developers for the cost of 1 in Silicon Valley or 2 in London. And that's a significant thing. That's one of the main factors that we're based here. The other is that there's a lot of untapped talent, scientific and engineering talent here. And their culture in terms of the Portuguese are probably the coolest people I've ever met and had the pleasure of working with. And the weather is quite nice, just like where you're based. So it kind of all mixes together.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I visited Lisbon like 3 years ago, and it was very beautiful. I think it would be a very good place to start a company. So last question is, what kind of advice do you have for, I don't know about neurotech, but some kind of like cognition startups, raising money and everything like that? How is that different compared in that you have science versus if you didn't?
I would say it's one of the best and most exciting times to be that kind of company raising money. You do need a mix of people and personalities that are non-sciencey. Like for example, you need an Amir, definitely, for every sciencey kind of co-founder, technical co-founder you would get. And, it's really, really important because running a company is one thing, but if you want to run a startup based on the whole concept of what the startup ecosystem has created, which is all about raising funds and convincing investors and getting early traction and all of these, jumping over hoops. It's a very nuanced experience that requires people who are non-technical to manage all of those non-technical things and let the technical people really focus on the product. And it's a really hard thing to balance. And that's for any startup. But the good timing right now is that because of coronavirus, fortunately or unfortunately, or however you can spin it, it has accelerated demand for all sorts of technologies that can help us on the social impact side. And so that's where science comes out and looks this best, it's where it can actually help us transcend limitations in the education sector and in the healthcare sector. Right now, I can see a very big demand for life science startups and biotech startups. And of course, BCI is probably going to continue to go through a very, very trendy period. So I would encourage people to really consider science, STEM-oriented startups to be even more important than the traditional kind of Uber models and so on that we already have too many of, I think.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, it's one thing to make like a Facebook for cats, but it's much more difficult to do something, science-based. And you got to basically convince the most skeptical population in the world, which is scientists.
Absolutely. And that's one of the problems, not problems, but challenges is, for example, for us, we have to develop our game library in parallel to establishing these research partnerships with institutes that share our kind of, vision and can apply it for studies that are relevant to them. Like, how does addiction for veterans affect cognitive impairment? How does diabetes accelerate the onset of cognitive illnesses? How does mental health potentially get addressed or treated, or there's a lot of different ways of doing it. And we found institutes that want to use VR brain training as more or less the next generation of what they use as the gold standard for measuring all these things. And we have to do studies with them and we have to prepare for those studies. And they have to go through certain waves. They have to go from tolerability tests first. And then when they graduate that, they go through feasibility studies. Then feasibility studies eventually graduate to clinical studies. And the amount of money and resources just proportionally blows up like a balloon for every one of these waves. So when you're a science sort of startup that needs to be validated with research and that kind of road, it's even more challenging, but you have to just have your ducks in a row that much more. It can be tricky, but it's also, I think, much more rewarding because the science side really validates that you're creating something that if you weren't around as startup founders wouldn't exist. And if it has a benefit to society, I mean, there isn't much better feeling and satisfaction to your life than when you're at the helm of such a venture.
Yeah, it's very exciting. It's like riding a rocket ship, right? Like it's very thrilling.
Absolutely. And depression is very, very common amongst founders because you have those dips like a roller coaster, actually. You know what I mean? And then you go up the high and then you have to make sure that you are taking care of yourself and making sure that you know that you don't follow any expectations or maps of what success is and what society's impression of it is. And it's really a trip.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Amir, this has been very, very interesting, and we're going to be following what Virtuleap is going to be doing.
Thank you so much, and it's been a pleasure to be invited on this show, and it actually inspired me to start catching up on any literature that I've been missing in your neck of the woods. I hope you the best, and I wish you and your family good spirits and health.
Hope you enjoyed the show and were able to learn something new, bringing together different fields in novel ways. Until next time on the Neural Implant Podcast.